Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for joining us here tonight for this webinar on the new CAP 2023 schemes. So my name is David Buckley, so I work here in direct payments here in Portlaoise. Just for a bit of structure for the night, so what we intend to do is to have 6 presentations for about the next hour or so, and then we'll have an opportunity to answer all the questions. Hopefully you will have you will have submitted, which I'll go through now in a moment. So first and foremost, as I said, you're very welcome to it, and we hope you do find it useful. This is in addition to 12 public meetings that the department is holding during March, 5 of which we've already had. So we've been in Mullingar, Charleville, Killarney, Rosscarbery and Clonmel last night, webinar tonight, and then this will be followed next week by meetings in Wexford, Castlebar, Carrick-on-Shannon, Ballinasloe, and then on to Carlow, Carrickmacross and Letterkenny. So the feedback thus far has been very good. I think most people have found it useful, which is exactly what we want. We don't want to be wasting people's time. So as I said, the format, so we'll have 6 presentations. You'll see a lot of people in front of you on the screens there at the moment. So in a few moments, we'll hand over first of all to Fran Murren, who will do a presentation on entitlements. So that'll be about 10 minutes. Then we'll hand over to Thomas Harty, who will do a presentation on land eligibility, on active farmer and on agricultural activity. Then we'll hand over to Brian Batt, who will do a presentation on the new eco schemes. Then on to Peter Hart, who will do a presentation on the new suckler carbon efficiency programme. Then on to Pat Morrison, who will talk about the new AECM, which will be replacing the GLAS. And then we'll finish up with Kevin McKeever, who will go through the new organic farming scheme. All told, that'll take about an hour. That will leave us with about an hour for questions. So the format of the questions will be, as we go through the presentations, you can type in on the questions box that you'll see in front of you. You can put in your question as you're going through them. We'll do the 6 presentations all together, so to speak, and then we'll hand over and we'll go through the questions. We'll do our very best to answer as many questions as we possibly can, and that's what we have done to date, and it's worked quite well. There's a couple of questions have already come in there. So the presentation, this webinar will be recorded, and the presentations that we're going to go through tonight, that each of the 6 speakers will go through, they're already up and available on the department on the gov.ie website. Just maybe one thing, just for a point of clarity at the start, so we won't be opening up the floor, so to speak, for questions where people can verbally put in their questions, purely simply being that it gets unwieldy and takes up a period of time. As I say, we have 12 public meetings where we're more than happy for people, as we've done for the last 5 meetings, for people to stand up and make their point in public. No issue whatsoever. We will deal with the questions in the question mode and get through as many of them as we possibly can. I suppose, just by way of background, the reason we're having the meeting is to talk about 2023 schemes, and that's what it is. It's 2023 schemes. So we're not going to be talking about 2022 schemes or 2022 payments. The background is most people will hopefully have received in the last week or 10 days an information letter from the department effectively outlining the main changes that are coming in the new 2023 schemes. And really the sole focus of these meetings is to make sure that farmers are fully informed about what the new CAP is likely to look like, and that in as much as possible, if they have to make any changes this year, we give farmers opportunity and plenty of time to do that, so as that you as a farmer can maximise your payments in 2023. I suppose the other few pieces just to say is, we are, and there's no point in apologising at the start, we will throw an awful lot of information at you over the next hour or so, but it is all important information as a farmer that you should know. As I said, we'll do our very best to answer as many questions as we possibly can within the time that we have here tonight. It is important to say that what we're presenting tonight is all of the details that have been included in Ireland's, or sorry, not all of them, as many of the most important elements that are included in the CSP that was submitted to the European Commission on the 31st of December last. But with the caveat that we have yet to receive formal feedback from the Commission. We expect that towards the end of this month, early April. So we are presenting to you the most up-to-date information there possibly is, but with that caveat that as we don't yet have formal feedback from the Commission, there may well be changes down the line. But if there is, we will come back at the earliest possible opportunity and outline that to you. So I suppose just without further ado, and before I hand over to Fran, just to reiterate, we do hope you find the meeting useful, informative, and we would urge you to put your questions in. We'll do our best to answer them, and if you are in a position over the next few weeks to attend one of the public meetings, if one is in your area. So Fran, I'll hand over to yourself. Thank you.
Thanks, David. I'm hoping that you can see my screen there. You can see the presentation. Is that all right? Yeah. Hopefully,
yeah, perfect. Thanks, Fran.
Yeah, great. Okay. Look, good evening, everybody. I hope you're all doing well out there, and I hope you'll find what we're about to tell you useful, as David has said. So I'd like to start by telling you some of the information around the direct payment schemes from 2023 onwards. So first of all, just to start with some of the key messages that would be useful for you to take away for yourselves. So the first thing to note is that all of the direct payment schemes, they're all changing in 2023. And the money associated with each of the different schemes is also changing because of the way the direct payment ceiling is being split out. Particularly, all payment entitlement values will change in 2023. And the other thing to note is that there are changes planned around the clawback mechanism that is currently in place around sales of entitlements without land, but also a new clawback around leasing of entitlements from 2023 onwards. So it's important to understand these so that you can prepare properly for 2023 onwards. So first, just to go through the different schemes that will make up direct payments from 23. The first one is the successor to the BPS. So that is the new name, Basic Income Support for Sustainability. Joining that, there are eco schemes. That's a new environmental scheme, new not only to Ireland, but also new to all of the EU. In addition, then there's the complementary income support for young farmers. That is the new Young Farmer Scheme, the successor Young Farmer Scheme. Another new scheme for Ireland is the complementary redistributive income support for sustainability. You might have heard this referred to as CRIS, but probably you'll know it best as front loading. And then finally, there's coupled income support, or you might know it better as protein aid. So they are the 5 different payment systems that are made up for direct payments from 2023 onwards. So to speak then a little bit about payment entitlements. You know, there's probably a lot of speculation still running around, and I know there has been over the past couple of years. So it's really important to set the record straight. There is no new allocation of payment entitlements this time around. There are no reference years for payment entitlements. If you as a farmer hold 23.2 entitlements this year, they're your entitlements. Next year, you will also hold the same 23.2 entitlements. So the number of your entitlements will stay the same, but the value of each one of those entitlements is absolutely going to change, no question about that. The new average entitlement value will end up somewhere around 155, 157, 158 euro, there or thereabouts. And payment entitlement values will converge. That convergence process will continue throughout the new cap, and payment entitlements will, lower value payment entitlements will all reach a minimum value of 85% of the average by 2026. And that will happen in pretty much equal steps over each of the years from 23 to 26. In essence, what this means is that all entitlement values will fall into a range between about 130 euro to 285 euro by 2026. Transfers of entitlements will still be possible in the usual way, but there are some changes planned around clawback. I'm going to deal with that separately in a couple of minutes. So over the past couple of weeks, all of you will have received your statement of entitlements for 2022 that sets out the value of your entitlements for 2022. And you'll receive a new one of those next year, probably around February, there or thereabouts, for the entirety of the new cap. So you'll be able to see your new entitlement values all the way through the new cap. So I mentioned these clawback changes. What are they? So at present, there is currently a clawback on entitlements sold without land in place. That means that if you sell entitlements without land, there's a 20% clawback. So say you sold 10 entitlements without land, the recipient would get 8 of those entitlements. 2 of the 2 that are clawed back, they go to the National Reserve to help fund that. And of course, the price that the recipient pays is reflective of the 8 rather than the 10 that you were selling. We are proposing to lift that clawback completely for 2 years, for 2023 and 2024. In tandem with that, we are proposing a new clawback. And that clawback is to be in place on all leases of entitlements from 2023, where a farmer leases out all or nearly all of their entitlements on a shorter term basis. So the particulars of that exactly are that if a farmer leases out more than 80% of their entitlements for less than 5 years, then there would be a 10% clawback per lease. So let me just explain that as a practical example. So if I have those 10 entitlements and in 2023, I lease out 9 or 10 of them, then for less than 5 years, then the recipient will get 10% less. When the lease ends, I will get back my entitlements, but minus that 10%. If I did that, if I did a lease for 2 years, for 3 years, the 10% is per lease rather than annual. Why are we doing this? Well, that reflects much of the discussion that we have had with a whole variety of stakeholders and analysis that we've done over the past couple of years. It's there to facilitate handover of farms, for security of tenure for those renting in. It syncs with some of the eco schemes and indeed some of the other agri-environment schemes down the line. And of course, it strengthens the active farmer provision and targeting of payments at those who are actively taking the farming risk. Another measure that many people have asked about is capping or reduction of payments. So capping will apply in 2 separate bands to the BIS payment only. In other words, to the total amount of your payment entitlements only. And it's applied in 2 bands. The first of those is for BIS values above 100,000. And for that amount of money over 100,000, there's 100% capping. So all of the payment above 100,000 is reduced. Between 60 and 100,000, there's an 85% reduction. And what this in practice really means is that there would be a maximum BIS payment of 66,000 based on your entitlements held. So it's whether you own them, whether you have them rented in, leased in, it's based on the ones that are currently held by you. And there is no facility for deduction of salaries or contracting costs and so on in that measure. So just looking at the blue box there at the bottom, you'll see that the first farmer there, Farmer A, has a BIS value of 110,000. So the amount above 100,000, that's reduced completely. So the 10,000 doesn't go out to the farmer. And the amount between 60 and 100,000 is reduced by 85%. That leaves 6,000. That is added to the amount that isn't affected by capping, the 60,000. And that means that Farmer A receives the maximum possible BIS payment of 66,000. If you look at Farmer B then with slightly less, they have a BIS payment of 80,000. So there's nothing over 100,000 here, but the amount between 60 and 80,000 is reduced by 85%. And in essence, that means that Farmer B ends up with a BIS payment of 63,000 after capping. I mentioned CRIS and front loading earlier on. So it's a new measure to Ireland. The total amount dedicated to this scheme is some 10% of the full direct payment ceiling. That equates to about 118 million per year. And what it really means for farmers is that they will receive a payment of €43 per hectare there or thereabouts, up to a maximum of 30 hectares. And that means the maximum benefit under this measure is €1,290. So again, looking at the examples in the blue box there, if you look at Farmer A has 20 eligible hectares, declares them on his BIS during his BIS application before the 15th of May 2023, and Farmer A receives a crisp payment of €860, which is 20 times €43 per hectare. You look at Farmer B, they have more land, they are declaring 30 hectares, so they get paid on their full 30 hectares at €43 and therefore receive €1,290 under that payment. You look at Farmer C, they're a bigger farmer again, they have 50 hectares. So they get paid on the maximum, which is the 30 hectares. You get 30 by €43, so they also get the €1,290, and that's the maximum that anyone can receive on that measure. What about generational renewal? So there's a couple of measures in there that are worth noting. So the first one is that there is a successor scheme to the current young farmer scheme. It's a different name, complementary income support for young farmers. But the amount of money dedicated to this is significantly increased. It's now 3% of the ceiling, which equates to about €35 million annually per year. Also, it's no longer based on payment entitlements, but on the eligible hectares declared by the young farmer, up to a maximum of 50. What this means in practice is that we're forecasting a young farmer's payment of somewhere between €170, €180, there or thereabouts, per eligible hectare declared by the young farmer, a substantial increase on the current €68 per activated entitlement, which would be the case this year. Young farmers who are currently in the young farmer scheme, maybe they've only completed 1 or 2 years of the 5-year support period for this measure, they can continue seamlessly onwards into the new cap. Coupled with that, then, we will also have a national reserve, and we will be having a national reserve. It's now a mandatory measure in the cap, where it's voluntary at present. So we will be having a national reserve for all years of the new cap. And that national reserve will allocate payment entitlements at the national average value to young farmers and new farmers. We've had a question quite often, what is a new farmer? Well, a new farmer is someone who is a new entrant to farming, who is not a young farmer. Essentially, they're older than 40 years of age. We often get questions also about partnerships and farms who are, maybe there's 2 or 3 farms or whatever in a partnership, and they're wondering, well, would I get multiples of the single crisp payment, or would I get multiples of the capping? Would be some allowance within partnerships for the total amount of capping? And I suppose, within the department, our guiding principle is that a farmer should not be disadvantaged by joining a partnership. But balancing that, we do have to make sure that there is some fairness. So what we are trying to guard against here are, situations that we've been made aware of where maybe, people are thinking of a paper partnership where there isn't actually farming happening by both parties in the partnership. So it's not fully resolved yet, and we have yet to resolve these, the intricacies, because farming structures have become really, really complex over the past number of years. So we do want to support farming and support partnerships, but at the same time, we have to be fair to everybody else who is also in all of these schemes as well. So then, just to finish up, I'd like to just say again, all payment entitlement values will change in 2023. And really, I suppose, apart from, predicting what your income might be next year from direct payments, this has a major effect on leases that you may be thinking about. Either you're somebody who is renting out entitlements, or you're somebody who's renting or leasing them in. So really, your contract here, if you're setting up a contract, really must reflect that there will be a step change in the value of entitlements. I've gone through the changes to the clawback around both the sale of entitlements and also the leasing of entitlements. It's important, if you fall into the category of leasing more than 80% of your owned entitlements, that you need to be aware of this. In general, I would say there's very much a targeting of payments towards the farming activity, also towards the environmental benefit, and those actually carrying out the farming risk. And this is not the last time you'll be hearing from us on any of these items, because we will be distributing more information as we move through this year. So with that, I might leave the presentation, and I'll hand on then to Thomas, I think, who is up next.
Yeah, thank you, Fran. Thanks for that. And just while Thomas is getting his screen ready to go, there's a lot of information Fran has obviously presented on, and there's a good number of questions have already come in it. So we'll bundle all those questions up and we'll deal with them at the very end. So thanks, Fran, and I'll hand over to Thomas, who's going to go through the next piece on active farmer and land eligibility. Thanks, Thomas.
Thanks, David, and thanks, Fran. I hope everyone can hear me. Yeah. Okay.
Perfect,
Thanks, Fran.
yeah.
Thanks, David. Okay. Good evening, all. As David has mentioned, I'm going to cover some of the elements of the new CAP that are important and that we think that farmers need to be aware of in 2022. Prepare themselves for 2023. So I'm going to cover what's known as the active farmer check, a little bit about land eligibility, and then a particular subset of land eligibility, the idea of agricultural activity. Okay. So the active farmer. So first of all, it's a term, I suppose, that we would all have heard, and it is mentioned quite a bit, and I will say thrown around a bit. But what we have decided in the department is that we're going to change from the current active farmer check that exists in the current CAP, and we're going to have a new holding level check. So each holding or farm is going to be checked, and fundamentally what we're checking is that the applicant, so the person who applies for payment, is the one carrying out the activity, as in doing the farming and taking the agricultural and economic risk. So that's not to say you mightn't be employing a contractor or using someone else to assist with the work, but fundamentally you're the one out there making the decisions and either taking the gain or running the risk if it's a good or a bad year in farming. So I've already mentioned we already have within the CAP the active farmer check, but currently the check involves looking at land, and in particular land that may be involved in non-farming activities such as recreational activities. The new active farmer from 23 is going to be a different type of check, but it's important to say that it does currently exist, but we're just changing it. Okay, so what does it mean? And I suppose what it means depends on the type of farming that you currently carry out. So firstly, and for the majority of farmers in this country, we're livestock based. And what we're saying is that to be an active farmer, that you must meet the greater than 0.1 livestock units per hectare. And for anyone that already is in ANC or DAS or headage, you might know it, it's the same stocking rate that exists in that scheme. So simply put, if you have always met the stocking rate for ANC and your farming isn't changing, you're going to meet the active farmer check by virtue of the stock you hold. That's not to say the lower stocking rate may be acceptable, and this was the typical example of that, and would be, maybe perhaps the holding has commonage land and the recommended stocking rate would be lower on some of those commonages and in particular on some of the habitat types. So if that's the situation on the farm, there is no issue with a lower stocking rate being the threshold for a particular farm, but the starting point would be the ANC, which will be 0.1. And now David at the end of tonight will talk a little about the stocking rate, how it applies to a range of schemes, but for the moment to say that it's the same for active farmer and ANC. What we're proposing is that the stocking rate that would be considered will be the previous year. And what I mean by that is in 2023, when you or your agent applies, you will be assessed based on the livestock you held in 2022. The idea or the real, that the purpose of that is to make sure that at the beginning of the year, farmers know where they stand. But if a farmer can't meet that or hasn't met it based in 2022, for example, a new entrant, they can choose to be assessed on 2023. In those situations, it may lead to a slightly delayed payment as we have to run the stocking rate check across the full 12 months, but it is there for farmers who want to be assessed based on the livestock. So tillage farmers, what we are going to do is that a sample of tillage farmers will have be requested to supply evidence, again, that they're taking the agricultural and economic risk, so that would, receipts for the purchase of seed or pesticides in their name. Just to mention, look, share farm agreements are completely acceptable, so it's not that you need to be the one up on the tractor doing the plow till and so on, but you have to have, as I say, skin in the game and sharing in the risks and the rewards from the farming enterprise. So the other major type of enterprise that exists, and numbers would be smaller in terms of grassland farms, but it does exist, and it's farmers who only make fodder or hay or silage. And if that's your type of farming enterprise, or perhaps you're just topping the land to maintain it, that's no problem at all. But we may ask for evidence, and that may take the form of receipts, again proving that you're taking the risk, so that you're paying a contractor to mow it, bale it, or wrap it, whatever the case might be, and then you're selling it to another party. I suppose to be clear, we're looking to ensure that it's not one farmer applying on the land and another farmer coming in through the ditch or the gate and actually doing all the work. And that's the fundamentals of what we're talking about when we say the active farmer check. Okay, so what we will be doing is that in the middle of the current year, and likely around June, we'll write to all farmers or applicants who, based on the information that we currently hold from 21, would not be deemed active. Now, that means for those farmers, there's time to adjust the farming practice, or perhaps even just to gather the paperwork that they will need to prove that they are an active farmer as I've just set out. So for some of these people getting letters, it's not that they have any issue, they just simply make hay or silage, but that we're just letting them know that they need to be prepared to, as I said, have receipts available if requested. Okay, so in 23, what it means, again, maybe referring to you or your agent who are familiar with our system, is that when you go to apply and log into the system in February or March of 23, the system will say to you, look, based on 22, you're an active farmer. So it'll be, the system will pull up the required information, and if you don't meet it, it will ask you on what basis you propose. So that might be livestock in 23, or it might be, as I said, you're making hay or silage. I suppose it's very important to say, and you're going to hear a lot tonight about a lot of schemes, and that the active farmer check is fundamental. So if you do not meet the active farmer check, and it doesn't matter what way you meet it, but if you don't meet it, no payments can be made under any of the schemes you're going to hear about tonight. So it's a critical thing that farmers are aware, and for the vast majority, it's no issue. They currently would be well above the thresholds, but for a group or cohort, they may need to consider the type of farming they're engaged with, and perhaps maybe to assess what the best structure is going forward and what changes they might need to make. Okay, so I said it's active farmer. I'm also going to cover land eligibility. And you've heard Fran talk about payments, and a lot of my colleagues tonight will talk about payments and payments based on hectares. And fundamentally, for land to draw down a payment under any area-based scheme, they must meet the definition of what's called the eligible hectare. And the current definition, as you see in front of the screen, is that it's an agricultural area with an agricultural activity, and the land must be at your disposal. And that simply means, as in disposal, that you either own the land, lease it, or rent it, or you have a right to be on the land. So as many of the rules in terms of eligibility that currently exist will roll over to the new cap. So as I've just said, it's an agricultural area with an ag activity, and you must have the right to the land. An agricultural area is grassland, arable, or permanent crops. Permanent crops are relatively rare in Ireland, but things like willow. Artificial features, so your farm buildings, they're not eligible for payment and won't be in future. And that to draw down payment, you must be carrying out an activity on the land. If there is no activity on the land, there's no payment. Now, those fundamental rules are staying the same, but there are some changes coming. So the changes, what are we proposing? Well, what we're proposing is that up to 30% of a parcel can be made up of features we're calling beneficial to the climate and the environment, but that would be things like scrub or trees or habitat. And if those features exist, they will have no impact on the eligible hectare value. And we'll look at an example in a second. This is the real world example, but it means those areas will draw down or be available for payment under the various area-based schemes. One of the other important changes, and it is that there are circumstances where, notwithstanding what I just said about there needs to be an activity to draw payment, that activity may occur every second year. And that is just to cover more explicitly maybe situations like callow lands in a very wet year where they can't cut hay or silage, so that farmers don't feel like that they have to engage in an activity every year when perhaps the activity may lead to damage to the land. And I suppose we're touching on today just the main changes and the important or the big stuff, but overall the main objectives of our changes are trying to make sure, now what I'm saying here is that we've coherence between pillar 1 and 2, but in, I suppose, everyday speak, we're saying that if you're trying to do the right thing for the environment, you won't find the department coming along and reducing your eligible area for payment. So that's the fundamentals, okay? You still have to farm. The level of activity isn't really important. It's that there is an activity going on, but we don't want someone who's trying to do the right thing feeling like they're going to have their payments reduced. Okay, so I said I'll show you sort of an example of this new 30% rule, and hopefully you can see on the screen there, this is a typical, as we would call it, land parcel. So it's permanent grassland. You can see multiple fields. You can also see, and anyone that's familiar with our maps or that gets them in the post, the red areas or red-lined areas. And these are areas that we have mapped out from the parcel. And the one we're looking at, this example, you can see it has a farm roadway and it has 4 areas of scrub. And currently, with the rules that we have in our system, each of those areas, the scrub and the roadway, are deducted. So a parcel that actually is 14.24 hectares in total area, we only consider 13.53 eligible for payment. With the proposed change, what we're saying is that that roadway will still be deducted, but everything else is considered eligible for payment. So the parcel at 1424 is now 14.19, again, with only the roadway being deducted. So a farmer will get paid in those areas of scrub and doesn't need to feel that he needs to remove them or she needs to remove them to make land eligible. They have an important role to play in the farming landscape. So just a little sidestep for a second when we talk about scrub, and just to mention one other change under what we term conditionality. So there is, under our good agricultural and environmental measures, or there's GLAS 8, it's called a thing called space for nature. And anyone that was or is a tillage farmer may be familiar with this. It used to be called, or it is currently called, ecological focus area. And at present, all tillage farmers of a certain scale have to have at least 5% of the farm made up of these areas, again, beneficial to the climate and environment. Going forward in the new cap, all farmers must have at least 4%. So grassland or tillage, all farmers must have it. But there's a wide range of features that a farmer can use to qualify to meet that 4%. There are linear features like hedges and drains, some area-based things like scrub, and even things like natura, commonage, or forestry lands will all help farmers meet that 4%. Brian, my colleague later on, will talk about space for nature and the role it has in our new eco scheme, but all farmers must meet this basic 4%. And again, just to mention, we're on the GAIX, anyone that is in tillage, while greening is no longer gone as a payment, crop diversification as in the requirement to have multiple crops, that still remains, just renamed as GAIX 7. So back then, and I said I was going to touch on one other part of the whole eligible hectare, and I mentioned at the outset, and it's there again, there must be an agricultural activity. What we're saying to farmers and to agents, to everyone involved, is that from 23, we'll be carrying out more explicit checks on not only is there an activity, but who's doing the activity. So this is distinct from the concept of the holding level check at ag to farmer. This is the parcel or field level check to say, okay, there is an activity, but who's the one carrying out that activity? And maybe to give some examples of that or explain what we mean, where there's some doubt on our part, we're going to ask through the application process that people will indicate how they're carrying out an activity themselves. And prime example would be a Cork farmer with a commonage in Donegal. We're going to ask them, look, not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think it's a legitimate question to ask, well, how are you carrying out an activity in Donegal if you're in Cork? Similarly, or the same concept, if you're a farmer declaring commonage, we're just going to ask, well, look, what activity are you as an individual carrying out in that commonage? Won't have to be livestock. There are other forms of maintenance or activity that are acceptable, but the question will be asked. Another example would be tillage farmers, grassland and no livestock. Again, probably and may well be making hay or silage, but we were going to ask the question, how are you as a tillage farmer, what activity are you carrying out? So in 23, again, through the application system, we'll be asking certain farmers, and another cohort I should actually mention is highly stocked farmers will also be asked to indicate how they are carrying out and what form of agricultural activity they're carrying out on their lands. But as I said, in 23, we're going to ask through the application, and where necessary, there'll be follow-up administrative checks, or maybe in a small number of cases, we may need to go out on the ground to validate what has been said to us. And I suppose to be direct or blunt about it, where there is the activity has been carried out by a third party, that land is not land is ineligible for payment. And I'm going to finish with just to talk about that picture you're seeing on the right. So this is an example from our system, and it's just a typical selection of parcels. We can see the front ones there, or the ones nearest the road, all silage made, that's fine. But we can see the one down by the beach, that it's grass, hasn't been mowed. And if this farmer had no livestock, or had this land was a long distance from his holding, we would likely be asking, well, look, how are you carrying out the activity considering this land is 40 miles away? And I suppose the bottom line is here, maps and people taking maps and someone else farming the land, there's going to be a much stronger focus on that with the new cap. So that's the points I'm covering tonight: active farmer, land eligibility, and specifically the agricultural activity part of it. And now I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Brian, who's going to cover the eco scheme.
That's great, Thomas. Thanks for that, Thomas. A lot of key information there. And just to remind people, just while Brian is getting set up, there's a good chunk of questions already after coming in. And just to continue sending in your questions on either the topics that Brian and others are going to go through, or on what Fran and Thomas have already covered. So Brian, over to yourself there. Thank you. Thanks, Thomas.
Thanks, David. Can you see my screen, David?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks,
Lovely.
Brian.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Brian Batt, and I'm going to speak to you tonight about the eco scheme. So you would have heard about the scheme. It's one of the biggest changes coming to the Pillar 1 payment under the next cap. So I'm going to start with some background information, a couple of slides on that, and then I'll give some details on the 8 agricultural practices that make up the eco scheme. So you can see there, why are we introducing an eco scheme? It's basically from next year onwards, it's mandatory for all European member states to establish and fund an eco scheme from the direct payments allocation. So you can see the figure there on the slides, 25% of Ireland's direct payments allocation has been ring-fenced for eco scheme in line with the regulation. So while it's going to be mandatory for member states, it will be voluntary for farmers to participate in it. The eco scheme is going to be 8 agricultural practices, all with benefits for the climate, environment, water quality and biodiversity, and they all go beyond conditionality and any other baseline requirements. The eco scheme payment is going to be an annual payment per hectare, and it's not linked with entitlements. How you're going to apply for it, it's going to be integrated with the BIS application from next year onwards, and it's our intention to pay the eco scheme in late November, early December. It will be open to any active farmer who submits a BIS application and who undertakes and delivers 2 of the practices that I'll go through. The farmer will be able to opt in and out annually, and they will be able to change their practices annually. So that's a question we're getting a lot. So if you join the eco scheme in 2023, you do not have to come back into it in 2024 if you don't want to. You can come into it for the 5 years of the cap, or you can not come into it at all. It's a voluntary annual scheme, so you can opt in and out on an annual basis and change your practices each year. So just a caveat before I go through the practices, that everything we say here tonight across all the schemes actually is subject to agreement with the European Commission. So just on a bit there on the costing of the scheme, if you look at the last point there, give you an idea of possible payment ranges there in the eco scheme. So if every farmer in Ireland comes into it, you're talking €66 per hectare per year. And then if you have an 85% uptake of 110,000 farmers, you're talking a payment rate of €77 per hectare per year. Okay, so the first agricultural practice, Thomas has already introduced it there in his slides, the space for nature. So as Thomas said, every farmer needs to get to 4% of these features, these habitats for biodiversity, landscape features, And there's the CAP summary booklet that's available on the website that David will give the address at the end of this presentations. But in that there's a box with a list of features that will qualify for Space for Nature. So basically, you have to reach 4% for conditionality to just qualify for your basic payment. If you go to 7%, that counts as one of your eco scheme measures. And if you go to 10% under the enhanced option, that count as your 2 eco scheme measures and qualify for payment. So we see that as being the big one for farmers. We see a lot of people coming in with the 7% already, and there will be a lot of farmers will already be above 10%, depending on how your farm is with features on it. We're hoping to have all of these features mapped by September and have estimates out to farmers by September, so you'll know already before the eco scheme opens how you're standing for this. Number 2 here, you can see extensive livestock production. So this is basically staying between a minimum and a maximum livestock a stocking rate. So the minimum is the same across all the schemes. It's 0.1 livestock units per hectare. So as Thomas said, that's the same for active farmer, ANC, and the other schemes. And the maximum stocking rate for this practice is 1.5 livestock units per hectare. Important thing to note on this is, like active farmer, it's based on this year's stocking rate. So you'll get the links later on for the stocking rate calculator, and in that, if you input your animal details for this year, you'll see if you're in the range this year and whether this will be a green light for you or not in the eco scheme next year. Number 3 is limiting chemical nitrogen usage. So there's 2 options here. If you're a grassland farmer, you'll see the table there on the slide. We'll get your stocking rate and we'll assign you to one of these 5 bands, and each band has an upper usage limit. If you're a tillage farmer, there's one limit for tillage. It's 139 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare. So what that actually is a 10% reduction of the average usage across the 5 main cereal crops. So between those 2 categories, we will be checking then at the end of the year using the new fertilizer register that's to be launched next year. Number 4 is planting of native trees or hedgerows. So the planting requirement is 3 trees per hectare or a metre of hedgerow per hectare. So for example, on your 32 hectare farm, you're either planting 96 trees or you're planting 32 metres of hedgerow next year. That would be one of your eco scheme practices. There's enhanced options also under this practice, which will count as your 2 measures and qualify for the full eco scheme. So it's basically doubling the planting requirement to 6 trees per hectare, or 2 metres of hedgerow per hectare, or 3 native trees and 1 metre of hedgerow per hectare. So one of the questions we've been getting at the public meetings on this is, would it be possible to plant all the trees in the first year to do your 5 years of eco scheme? We haven't got formal feedback from the Commission yet. We do think it could be a runner with them and that we would be able to administer that. But the only issue we could have with that is whether planting stocks will be available next year, because there's a lot of schemes opening planting trees next year. So it is something we're looking at. Number 5 is use of a GPS controlled spreader or sprayer. So at least 60% of chemical fertilizer or plant protection products to go out through a GPS controlled spreader. It can be your own machine, or you can use a contractor service. And if you want to see if a machine is eligible, it's based on the TAM specification for GPS controlled spreaders, which is S195A. Okay, number 6 is soil sampling and appropriate liming. So it's the soil sample on all eligible hectares at a rate of 1 sample per 3 hectares. And if soil analysis shows that there is a liming requirement, the farmer will have to put out 1/3 of that in the first year. This is the only option in the eco scheme that you can take every year. This is only every 3 years as an option, because just to line up with Chaga's soil sampling advice. So if you take this in 23, you won't see it on your eco scheme menu again until 2026. And also just to note, nitrates derogation farmers can't take this practice in the eco scheme. They're already soil sampling and liming mandatory as part of their derogation. Number 7 is planting a break crop. So it's planting 20% of the arable area with beans, peas, oilseed rape or oats, or any combination of these. And number 8, final one, is sowing a multi-species sward on at least 6% of the eligible hectares in the year it's taken. So if you took it in 23 and planted 6% of your hectares, and you want to take it again in 24, you would plant a further 6% of your hectares in multi-species sward. The number 7 and 8 there will both just be selected on your land details application or tab as part of your BIS application. So finally for me, just to recap on some of the key points, the eco scheme is new from next year onwards. You'll be applying online at the same time as your BIS. It is an annual voluntary scheme, and when you take the enhanced options into account, there's 10 actions. You must choose 2 and you must deliver 2 to qualify for payment. And as I said halfway through, all of that is subject to Commission approval. So I'm going to hand you back now to David.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Thank you for that. And just while Peter's getting set up, and Peter's going to go through the suckler carbon efficiency program in a moment, just 2 things just to remind people of. So the presentation that we're going through tonight, that some of the speakers have already gone through, and Peter and others will go through, they're already up on gov.ie from earlier on. And also just to continue to put in your questions as many are already doing, and we'll get to as many of them as we possibly can after the organics presentation. So Peter, I'll hand over to yourself, and thanks, Brian.
Thanks, David. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks, Peter.
Okay. Good evening, folks. I'm going to talk you through just briefly the Suckler Carbon Efficiency Programme, which is the successor to BDGP. BDGP has been with us now for 7 years. The Suckler Carbon Efficiency Programme borrows heavily from the previous scheme, but there is some substantial differences. There's some more ambitious targets that are in it. There's some elements that we've taken in from other schemes, and there's some new things. And I'm going to point out a couple of things that I think are probably important to kind of highlight tonight as we go through the screens. But I'll be quick enough. But just as I said, I'll once I get to them, I'll point them out to you, and we can raise them then. So the budget for the 5 years, and it is a 5-year program because it's an environmental scheme, so it's a multi-annual program. The budget is 260 million across the 5 years. The payments is on land rather than animals, as was with BDGP. So the payments are at €225 per hectare for the first 15 eligible hectares, with 180 for each remaining eligible hectare, which is up to then the maximum payable area. The maximum payable area is calculated on the basis of the reference figure divided by 1.5 livestock units, which gives you the maximum payable area. And once you meet all the other requirements under the scheme, you'll max out your payment on that basis. So the eligibility requirements, and the first one here is the one that I want to highlight initially. You have to be a member of the Board BIA SPLAS scheme. That's the Sustainable Beef and Lamb Quality Assurance Scheme. The reason for this is under the old BDGP, we had the Carbon Navigator, which you had to complete in year 1 with the help of a farm advisor and then update annually as you went through the scheme. But that's now been replaced by the sustainability audit that is there as part of your Board BIA membership, and more specifically the carbon footprint that works out. That this needs to be in place prior to your application for the Suckler Carbon Efficiency Programme. I know in schemes that we've run in the past, we've had a grace period where people could apply for the scheme and then sort out their Board BIA afterwards. But in this instance, the Board BIA has to be there from the beginning. So you need to have your application in and your initial surveys done and be accepted into the scheme prior to making an application under the Suckler Carbon Efficiency Programme. Separate to that, you'll also have to submit a BIS application in each year, which is fair enough considering it's a land-based scheme. We have to know which lands you have. And then you also need to calve down at least 50% of your reference numbers of animals each year. So this is something that we didn't have in BDGP. It was a breeding scheme, so people automatically went ahead and calved down anyway. But we're copper fastening it here on the level of calving that needs to happen each year, which is 50%. There'll also be a half-day livestock handling course, and the reason for that is because there's a weighing element, and we're going to discuss that in a second. And there'll also be mandatory training on the implementation of the actions under the scheme. So this would be for new entrants into the scheme who aren't familiar with the genomic side of things, exactly why we do what we do and how to do it. So there will be, or what we're planning on doing, or the hope is to have historical reference years. So obviously for BDGP, the reference year was 2014. And if you're a new entrant, it was 2015. But what we're hoping to do for the Suckler Carbon Efficiency Programme will be when you're making your application, you will be presented with all the data, the calving data from 2016 to 2021, from which you would select 3 years, from which we would then calculate an average. This would then become your scheme reference figure. But there would also be the ability then each year to amend that reference figure downwards in order to reduce numbers to match decisions that you've made on the holding. Maybe you would have lost land, or maybe you wanted to diversify into another area. That this allows you the flexibility, if you like, to amend your reference figure each year going forward, so that under BDGP that facility wasn't there and some people removed themselves from the scheme, whereas with this flexibility we feel that it's less of a penalty for farmers, that they can actually amend it as they go along. Anybody who doesn't have data then within those years will be classified as a new entrant, and they would actually declare their target for 2023 at the application stage, and we'd move forward with that then, similarly to what we did with BDGP in the past. So then the mandatory actions under the scheme. So the first one is the replacement strategy, and again under BDGP we would have had these targets, but we're simplifying it in some ways. That in years 1 and 2, 80% of the calves produced on the holding have to come from a 4 or 5 star sire. We're not differentiating between stock bulls or AI anymore. It's purely that 80% of calves need to become for a 4 or 5 star in years 1 and 2. And that's the second thing I need to highlight, because people need to be making decisions now, if they're planning on coming into the scheme, that they need to make sure that in year 1, 80% of the calves produced on the holding have to come from a 4 or 5 star source. The target then increases in years 3 and 4 to 85%, and then in year 5 up to 90%. That's on the sire side. On the dam side, years 1 and 2, 50% of your reference figure of dams that are retained on the holding have to be 4 or 5 star. This increases to 65% in years 3 and 4, and then increases to 75% in year 5. So obviously these are increases over the targets that we would have had in BDGP, and it's more ambitious, but it needs to be in order for us to get it past the Commission. We need to be pushing forward, and we need to be stretching ourselves a bit, and this is how we're doing it. But then the other actions that are there under the scheme is the weight recording element, and obviously anybody who's been in beep over the last 3 or 4 years will be familiar with this, where the cow and the calf, the unweaned calf, are weighed on the same day. We would probably have some controls about what age, the minimum age that the calf has to be, but other than that, it would be the same. And obviously the infrastructure is there, where we have the online submission of weights. We have an online app. We also have then the series of scales available nationwide for rental, etc. So what's there and what has been established under BEEP will be utilized here. On the genotyping side then, at least 70% of your reference number of animals on the holding have to be genotyped each year without repetition. And again, that isn't a massive deviation from what we would have had under BDGP. And then the final one then is data recording. This is where participants have to submit data of animal events, whether it's calving data, sire or dam surveys, etc., that will be put into ICBF in order to qualify for payment at the end of the year. So that's a brief run through of the Suckler Carbon Efficiency Programme. As I said, the two things, if you only take 2 things away from it, the one would be the Board BIA membership, and the second will be the requirement, as I said, to have 80% of cows produced in the first 2 years coming from a 4 or a 5 star source, whether it be stock bull, AI, or a mixture of the bulls. Okay, so that's me, and I'm going to hand you over now to Pat Morrison, who's going to talk you through the AECM, which is the successor to GLAS.
That's great. Thanks, Peter. And just while Pat's getting set up there, just them last 2 points in particular, as you said, they're the crucial things on the Suckler scheme. And also, I suppose, just to reiterate, obviously, the main reason we're running these is we're following up on the letter that hopefully every farmer received over the last week or 10 days from the department, titled the information letter, the important elements of the new CAP. And it's worth going back. Maybe when it's fresh in your mind after this webinar, hopefully come back and just look into that letter to reiterate, I suppose, the important information that we're trying to get out to yourselves. So as much as possible, you maximise your own payments in respect to 23. So thanks, Peter. Okay, Pat, I'll hand over to yourself in terms of the new ACM.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I'm just going to give a short presentation on the new Agri-Environmental Climate Measure. A lot of you will be familiar with the current AECM, which is the GLAS scheme. So this new scheme is going to replace GLAS hopefully in 2023 onwards. So just to structure the presentation, I'll give a brief overview of the scheme, the 2 different measures, the general and the co-op measure. I'll look at the AECM cooperation map, an introduction to the results-based approach, an overview of the payment rates, and a look at the important timelines in the year ahead. So some of the key features of the scheme. First of all, it's one scheme with two distinct measures. So a farmer can only apply for one measure and therefore have only one contract. And the two measures are, there's a general measure and a cooperation measure. So an eligible farmer in any part of the country may apply to participate in the scheme. And the application will also include the submission of a farm sustainability plan. Intake will be on a phased basis via tranches for both measures, and will be subject to both the department and advisor capacity. Tranche 1 we hope will open in Q4 of 2022, with a Tranche 2 in Q4 of 2023, with the possibility of Tranche 3 and further tranches depending on uptake. It'll be a tiered structure in the general measure, similar to GLAS, and applicants will receive priority entry based on which tier they're eligible for. Some other key features of the scheme compared to GLAS is going to be more environmentally ambitious, more targeted and more innovative. There's a broader range of actions for farmers to choose from. There's a move away from a species-specific focus to a habitat establishment and the enhancement of habitat quality. And the underpinning principle of the scheme will be the right action in the right place. There's a delineation of land areas, and we've identified high environmental priority areas, and the management of these areas will be assisted by cooperation groups. We're moving from a prescription-based scheme to a hybrid-based scheme, which is both prescription-based measures and results-based measures. And as I said earlier, there's also the introduction of the farm sustainability plan. So on the general measure for Tier 1, farmers will qualify for Tier 1 if they commit to completing appropriate mandatory actions relevant to the priority environmental assets on their holdings. Assets such as private nature land, commonage, land that's in the geese and swans mapped area, or the breeding waders mapped areas. Farmers who have catchments identified as having high status water objectives, where they choose appropriate actions in their farm sustainability plan to address water quality. Farmers who take on the conservation of rare breeds action, or registered organic farmers will also qualify for priority access under this tier. Tier 2 then addresses people who choose priority environmental actions. So farmers whose land include a vulnerable water area may apply for access to the scheme under Tier 2. Also, farmers may be considered under Tier 2 if they're participants in a native woodland establishment scheme or the agroforestry scheme, or they adopt one of the tree planting actions. In the absence of the above, farmers who have a whole farm stocking rate exceeding 130 kgs of organic nitrogen per hectare, or tillage farmers with more than 30 hectares of arable crops, if they adopt at least one of the following mandatory actions: min-till, catch crops, overwinter stubble, one of the grassland margin actions, or low input peat grassland, can qualify under Tier 2. So there's a wide range of general actions then. So applicants can come under Tier 3 and choose from a range of these actions. These actions aim to address climate change, water quality, and have biodiversity benefits. So these may be chosen in addition to some of the mandatory actions under Tier 1 or Tier 2, or for Tier 3 applicants, they just choose from these range of actions. And as you can see, there's a broad range, so there's a good choice for all farmers to suit people's individual circumstances. So just an overview of the AECM cooperation areas. So you'll see here there's a map showing 8 distinct areas. So these are the 8 cooperation zones. So each area will have a cooperation team who will be responsible for that area. So if your land is within those areas over a certain threshold, then you will only be allowed to apply for AECM cooperation measure. And all other farmers then can apply for the AECM general measure. So the structure of the cooperation measure, the core payment for all applicants under this measure will be from results-based payments. And these payments will relate to the habitat quality scores for the farmer's land. And typically the scorecards that will be used will be either peatland scorecard, a grassland scorecard, or woodland scorecard. Farmers will also be able to avail of increased payments if they take on non-productive investments or cooperation actions. Non-productive investments are typically where a farmer seeks to improve the habitat quality score of the land. And examples might be extra water provision for livestock, the control of invasive species, or improving the grazing infrastructure of the land. Cooperation actions generally relate to actions that may be carried out on a landscape scale. So the cooperation teams will have responsibility for developing these actions depending on the local needs and objectives of the area. Examples would be maybe predator control, fire prevention, and flood prevention measures. So the role of cooperation teams, first of all, they'll have to liaise with the NPWS and Law Pro experts at a local level to ensure the local priorities and needs are identified for the area. They will have to develop a local action plan, which will deliver the optimum environmental benefits for the area. And they will have to work with farmers and communities to develop appropriate landscape projects and to foster community involvement. They will also provide ongoing support to both advisors and to farmers. So the results-based approach, it's relatively new, but a lot of farmers may be familiar with it if they were involved in some of the EIP schemes or the most recent REAP scheme. So payments are linked to biodiversity or habitat quality and are calculated based on scorecards. And the scores range from 1 to 10. And if you get a score of 10, it's the optimum score and therefore the highest payment rate. So the higher quality the habitat you have, you will be rewarded for that with a higher payment. And the scorecards will address issues such as the ecological integrity of the land and also maybe hydrological aspects of the land. So here you see two pictures. On the left, you'll see a typical high scoring field of low input grassland. You can see it's a very diverse sward with very good environmental benefits. And on the right is maybe a low scoring field, which maybe is dominated by perennial ryegrass and is typical of a land that has receiving maybe high rates of fertilizer, chemical fertilizer. So I suppose, look, it's up to farmers to decide if they want to be rewarded for delivering higher environmental outputs. So the payment rates and funding for the AECM scheme. In the general measure, we have a target of taking up to 30,000 farmers, and the maximum annual payment is €7,300 per farmer. And we estimate the average payment per year at about €5,000. In the cooperation measure, we have a target of taking in 20,000 farmers with the maximum annual payment of €10,500, and we estimate the average farm payment to be in the region of €7,000. The overall scheme cost over the period will be €1.5 billion. So the important timelines in the year ahead, we expect to open access agreement screens on ag food in June of 2022, and this will allow advisors to access their farmer clients' data to comply with the data protection regulations. We hope to open the farm sustainability plan and application screens in the summer of 2022, and this will allow advisors and farmers to initiate the process of choosing the right and appropriate actions for their farm. And hopefully, if the CAP strategic plan is approved by the Commission, we hope by September that we will be able to take the submission of applications from the period of October to November 2022, with the approval and commencement of contracts from the 1st of January of 2023. So that's it, thank you. I'm going to hand over now to Kevin, who's going to go through the organic farming scheme.
Okay, thanks, Pat. Thanks for that. And just while Kevin is getting set up and sharing his screen, I suppose one important point, and Pat said it there in the very last bullet or the second last bullet. Obviously, all this information we're giving out tonight, as we've given at the public meetings, and we'll continue to do. It is all subject to Commission approval. As I said at the outset, while Ireland submitted its CAP strategic plan on the 31st of December last, as did in fairness many other member states, we've yet to receive any formal feedback from the Commission. That's not unexpected. We expect it will be sometime towards the end of this month, early April. But rather than wait, and in particular, rather than wait till it's approved in September, we felt it was absolutely prudent to get out and tell people as much of this information as we possibly can up front. So just while we say it a lot, it is with that caveat that it is subject to Commission approval. So thanks to Pat, and now I'll hand over to Kevin for the organics piece. Okay, Kevin, thank you.
Okay, thanks, David. My name is Kevin McGeever from the organic unit in the department. I just want to outline to you the organic farming scheme that is being proposed under the new CAP strategic plan. So basically, just to give you an outline of, currently there is 90,000 hectares of land under organic production in Ireland. That is 2% of all organic land, of all land in Ireland. So a very small area, and something that we want to build on. There's clearly market opportunities for the organic sector in Ireland. Just to give you a bit of an outline of that, currently the organic market, the value in Ireland is 189 million. And that's an increase of 16% on previous years. And indeed, that's the third highest rate of growth across Europe, just behind Germany and Austria. So clearly, there is market opportunities for organic farming and organic produce. And across Europe, there's public procurement is very strong in Germany, Austria, Denmark, and as you are aware, we export 90% of our product. So there is benefits there, and there is opportunities rather for organic farms. Now, under the CAP, for the period 23 to 27, we have a target of 7.5% of area under organics by the end of the period. And to achieve that target, we have a budget of 256 million for the period. Now, just to put that into context, for the last rural development programme, there was a budget of 56 million. So you can see there, that's a five-fold increase. So clearly it shows that we're serious about getting people to convert to organic farming. So what do I need to be eligible to join the organic farming scheme? Well, as previous speakers said, it's a condition. You have to be an active farmer. So that's the main thing. You must hold an organic license on the date of submission of your application. Now, to get an organic license, you would contact one of the organic control bodies that operate in Ireland. There's two that are involved in the land-based schemes. So we've got Organic Trust based in Naas in County Kildare, and then we have the Irish Organic Association. They're based in Athlone. And both of them organisations work to the EU regulations. So it's a matter of choice for you, the farmer, on who you go with. You must also declare all your lands in your name on BPS. And just to outline the organic farming scheme application process, it's a two-stage process. We would see that the scheme would be open in October, November of this year. So you would apply on ag food for the OFS at that stage. That's a very simple process. And then in or before May of 2023, you would declare all your lands on BPS, and that is the second element of the process. And we would pick up the area and the parcels that you declare on your lands on your BPS, or rather your BIS application, which is what it'll be in 2023. You must also complete a 25-hour course in organic farming. And these courses are run by Teagasc, and they're also run by NOTS up in the Northwest, and that's the National Organic Training Skillnet. So at the moment, them courses are they're done online, but thankfully the restrictions have eased, so there will be a part of that 25-hour course. There will be a visit to farms as well to see how organic farmings work. And indeed, just on that, the department in conjunction with Teagasc have organic farm demos right across the country, and these are invaluable for farmers, both organic and conventional, to see how an organic farming setup is how it's managed and how they deal with it on a day-to-day basis. There is also a stocking rate requirement of 0.1 livestock units per hectare. That was up to now, that was 0.5 livestock units, which would equate to a suckler cow to 2 hectares. So now we've brought that down to 0.1. So that's a ewe to the hectare. And we've done this to encourage those farmers with marginal land to consider joining organic and to get a payment on all their land. Up to now, as I said, it was 0.5, and if you didn't satisfy the 0.5 limit, you got a pro rata payment. So we hope that this will encourage many farmers on marginal land to join organics. So these are the proposed payment rates under the new CSP, under the new CAP strategic plan. So for horticulture, for the first 6 hectares for the in-conversion period, that's the first 2 years of in-conversion. There's a payment of €600 per hectare. And then when you're fully organic, that falls back to 400. And that's a substantial increase to what it is there at the moment. At the moment, it's 300 and 200. So there's a large increase there. For the tillage farmers, for the first 20 hectares, there's an in-conversion payment of 290, and thereafter up to 70 hectares is at 190 per hectare. For the dry stock farmer, in conversion period, increase from 220 up to 250 per hectare, and that's for the first 70 hectares. And that 70 hectares, that up to now, that was 60. So we're given the full payment on an additional 10 hectares. And again, this is to encourage the larger farmers and maybe the finishers into the system, because currently we would have a lot of suckler farmers, and their weanlings are being lost to the conventional sector. So they're being born organically, but they're not finished organically. So we're trying to close off that as well, and we hope by increasing the payment that we will achieve that. And now we also have a separate new dairy payment, and this is to encourage conventional dairy across to organics. at the moment, very small numbers of dairy farms, organic dairy farms. So we're hoping that that these payments will attract those additional farmers. And just while we're here tonight and we're talking about the new 2023 provisions, there is an organic farm scheme open at the moment, and it is open. It's been open for the last 5-6 weeks, and it'll close on the 8th of April. And just to let farmers be aware that if they come into the scheme this year in 2022, that any increased rates that would happen in 2023, they would automatically get them higher rates. So if you're interested in going organic, don't wait basically till next year. If you're prepared now, if you talk to your Teagasc advisor or your ag consultant, and if you're ready to come in now, the scheme is open until the 8th of April. So that's all I have to say. So I'll hand you back to David. Thank you very much.
Kevin, that's great. Thank you very much, Kevin. So just, ladies and gentlemen, there's only literally a handful of slides left, and I'll just go through them briefly so that we can get to answering the questions and make sure we give ample time for the many questions that have come in. So just a very couple of quick things just to clarify. So many of the speakers will have spoken about the 0.1 livestock units per hectare. So you will be aware in your information note in the letter that we sent out, it was originally set down as being 0.15, and basically as a result of feedback from a number of the farm bodies and equally so from a number of farm advisors, we re-looked at that and it's been set at 0.10 livestock units per hectare, which is equivalent to a ewe per hectare, which I'll come to just in a moment. The important point just from this slide is to say that that stocking rate of 0.1 is across those 4 areas. So it's across active farmer, it's across ANC, it's across organic farming, and then equally so it's across the eco scheme, the agricultural practice 2 that Brian would have spoken about. The only one that has a maximum livestock unit is agricultural practice 2, 1.5 livestock units per hectare that Brian would have spoken about too. As Thomas would have mentioned, so the stocking rate will be based on the previous year. So for argument's sake, in 23, we'll be looking back to 22 and as we move forward. However, if for some reason, based on farmers' farming activity this year or this year may not have suited them, then there is the potential to use the current year as in 2023 for 2023 as Thomas outlined. So Kevin, if you wouldn't mind just moving on just to the next slide there, please. So the next piece is just around the stocking rate coefficients. So I mentioned about the 0.1. So from 2023 onwards, Ireland, as part of its CAP strategic plan, will be using the new Eurostat stocking rate coefficients. So there are a couple of important changes here. So most people will be well familiar that the ewe was always 0.15. That's what the ANC rate was set at 0.15, so a ewe to the hectare. As you'll see now in the second row from the bottom of that table, from 2023 onwards, that will be changing to 0.1. So a ewe will now be 0.1, and hence, as in the previous table, ANC, active and eco and organics will align with that at 0.1. The other important change to address here is traditionally all cows, so to speak, were the same at 1 livestock units per hectare. What Eurostat are now doing, and we will follow suit from 2023 onwards, is the suckler cow will be 0.8 of a livestock unit per hectare, as it's set out there in that table. The other point just on this is the very first 2 rows of it. Traditionally, your animal from 0 to 2 years was treated the same, and it was 0.6 of a livestock unit per hectare. What the new Eurostat coefficients, they divide that. So your under 1 year, your weanling or your calf is 0.4 of a livestock unit. And then when they go to the yearling, the 1 to 2 year olds, then they increase to 0.7. So I suppose for consistency, like virtually all other member states, we're going to be using the Eurostat coefficients from 2023 onwards. And the important point is the change for your ewe, the change for your suckler cow, and the change for your weanlings and your yearlings. So Kevin, if you don't mind just moving on to the next slide there, please. So a couple of other things. If we were doing this in public, as we've done for some of the meetings already, and we'll be doing for the next 6 or 7 meetings that are left, We've had a number of our department colleagues with these calculators set out at the back of the function room. So if it does suit you, and you're more than welcome to come to any of the public meetings in the weeks ahead, we'd be able to go through this, or our colleagues will be able to go through these with calculators with you. So there's 2 calculators here, and in a moment, Fran will just put up where they are on the department's website. There's a stock and rate calculator, and what you'll need is 2 pieces of information for this. You'll need the number of hectares that you expect to claim in 2022, grassland, and if you have tillage as well, and then the expected livestock numbers and their ages per month. What and why we're putting this out to farmers is so that in filling up this calculator, a farmer, it's as good as the information you put in, but it'll give you a very good indication where you're going to stand vis-a-vis your active farmer status in 23, your ANC status in 23, and equally so for your agricultural practice 2 and your agricultural practice 3 that Brian would have spoken about. So agricultural practice 2 is that extensive livestock measure, the 0.1 to 1.5 livestock units per hectare, and agricultural practice 3 is the limit in chemical nitrogen. So it'll tell you into which of those bands do you fall. The last calculator 2 is the direct payments calculator, and that direct payments calculator ultimately is going to tell you where, based on the number of hectares that you claim, the number of entitlements you have, and the value of those entitlements, what your payments will look like from 23 to 27 onwards. So if you do come to any of the public meetings, we can absolutely assist you in completing that if you so wish. Equally so, they're up there for everyone to see and to view, and for them to fill in themselves in your own time, either on a laptop or tablet or on your mobile phone. So if you don't mind just moving on there, Kevin, just to this very last slide. So very briefly, so the key timelines, some of which we've already covered, but just to try tie it all together. So those payment calculators, stock and rate calculators, they're already published. They're up in the department's website. As Thomas would have mentioned, on the active farmer letters, we intend to issue them in June of this year. So they'll go out to any persons that we consider, as things stand based on the information we hold on department databases, may have an issue, and it's to give them forewarning, so to speak, that they may need to take some sort of corrective action to address that issue. As Pat mentioned on the AECM application, the intention is to open that from August onwards, subject to the Commission approval, with the submit button to submit applications in October, November. Subject to, as we said, EU Commission approval, hopefully in September 22. On the space for nature estimates, as Brian mentioned, our intention is to, while the department is doing all the space for nature estimates for all farmers, the intention is to advise all farmers in September as to what their percentages will be. So whether we think they're 5 or 10 or 15 or 20% or whatever it may well be. And at that same time, we will also provide then on ag food for both the farmers and his or her advisor what the historical stock and rate data has been for that farmer for previous years, to give them an indication as to where they are likely to be vis-a-vis the extensive livestock measure, in particular for eco. OFS application, as Kevin mentioned, that will open in the 4th quarter of this year, and then, as Fran would have mentioned at the very outset, the intention is in February of next year, the BIS, the CRIS, and the eco application will be opened, as is kind of the normal time for your BPS application, along with your normal statement of entitlements. So that's it in terms of all the formal presentations. Fran is just going to share one last slide in terms of the calculators, just so people are familiar with where the calculators are on the website. And once Fran is finished, then we're going to go through some of the questions. Okay, Fran?
Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen there now.
Yep.
You could just give me, yeah, okay. So quite a bit of information, quite a few of the questions actually have asked, where can I get the slides, where's this information, will this be recorded, and so on. So the place to go to is gov.ie/cap, gov.ie/cap. And that will bring you to the page that you see in front of you there now. So you'll see there's the first item on the page there is the list of all the public information meetings through March and their locations, and so on. Then the next one down is the presentations, and you'll see there's quite a bit of information in there. What I wanted to draw your attention to in particular, just because this is not in person, so I can't say to you that we have staff at the end of the hall that are there to help you out with your calculators. So this is by way of filling in for that. So if you look at item number 7 on that list, CAP calculators, click on that, brings you down the page, and down along the page you have 2 things. You have a link to the calculators where it says the calculators are available here, and then below that there's a guide on how to use it. But look, it's really intuitive. When you click that link, you'll open up a new page that contains the calculators. So the first page of that gives you some background information, what you need, and some of the detail behind it. You go to the next tab down along on the left-hand side to payments. You'll see that you're in the payments calculator. And I'll very quickly do one example here for you. You've got two tabs, one for a single set of entitlements and one if you happen to hold multiple sets. So it asks you for the number of your entitlements. So let's say for the crack, you have 30 entitlements. Let's say you also have 30 eligible hectares, and it asks you then for your BPS plus greening. So let's imagine this farmer has in and around the average of €260 as a BPS plus greening per hectare payment. Then you hit calculate, and when you move down along here, it'll tell you this farmer, there's their BPS plus greening is 260. The payment currently would be 7,800. And then as you move along, you'll see that for each of the years, 23, 24, 25, 26, you'll see each of the payments. So you've got the BIS entitlement value. So you see that step change that I talked about, 155. Remember I said the average was going to be around 155, 157. You'll see the BIS payment, the eco payment, the CRIS payment, and out then further to the right, the total and also the difference between current and the future payment. You can see in this case, the projected future payment here, this farmer would be about €461 better off in each year. You'll also see in this particular case, this farmer's BIS is not changing in each of the years. That's because they already have entitlements at the average and they're not subject to convergence. If you had a higher value or a lower value in there, you would see convergence coming through. Moving on then to the stocking rate calculator. You'll see here, if you click on the little tab with the cattle on it there for the stocking rate, you can see it opens up another page where you can put in all your information for your weanings and yearlings and heifers and suckler cows, dairy cows, all the way down along. There's quite a bit down along there. And at the end of that, you can click calculate. This button becomes live when you populate the information, put in all the information, and down at the bottom then you'll get your eligibility summary then. Whether you'd meet active farmer, whether you'd meet ANC, Eco Scheme Ag Practice 2, and the banding for that as well. So it's quite useful, really handy, and reasonably intuitive to go and use, and you can figure out what your payments would be, but also what your stocking rate would be. Okay, so back to you there then, David.
Yeah, that's great. Listen, thanks for that, Fran.